Let's just close our eyes and start this meeting in silence, as we always do, to just give ourselves the chance to land back inside and simply be with whatever we find there, whatever is. Good afternoon, Jack.
Good afternoon. So based off our last chat, which I remember having such distinct feelings of intellectually understanding the idea and then the rest of my system not having caught up. And this push-pull sensation between like it coming in little pieces and then getting peeled back and then pushing forward. It felt like one step forward and sometimes 5 steps backwards away from this truth. I've been thinking about what pinpointed that for me and the pain that came from that experience. And I studied under, in a lineage of teachers where Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, it was bliss and giggling and lightness and, this is also beautiful. And that I was, oh, great, yeah, that sounds fantastic. And then I also studied under another teacher who, over the years, I realized had a front-facing giggling guru sort of presentation. And we worked together, and he ended up saying to me one day, oh, look, can you take care of this? Because it's very important that I appear as the giggling guru, as I appear blissful. And I remember experiencing such enormous shame at my own emotions around so much wanting the spiritual path to be all light, love among beings, and it being incredibly painful for me. And I was hoping we could talk about, I know you had an experience with Ramesh in Bombay, and I was hoping we could talk about that pain, that anguish, that when sometimes this path isn't necessarily just feeling light and peaceful and blissful. Because for me, it threw me right off. I figured I was doing it wrong.
Yeah, I understand. I think behind any spiritual seeking lies one common denominator in nearly all cases, and that is pain, psychological suffering. When I use the word suffering and pain, I'm nearly always referring to psychological pain. I'm not talking about the pain of poverty or the pain of being caught in a war zone, talking about a particular type of psychological suffering. And it's normally pain within that area of a person's individual life that forces them to look inside and to start the process of inquiry and questioning in whatever way they do according to their destiny and their body-mind, to try and discover, why am I not happy? What is it that went wrong here that I'm still unable to be in this body-mind and be content, be at peace, be happy? So I think inevitably pain is the engine room for all spiritual seeking. There are exceptions. Probably the most famous one that I know of is Ramana Maharshi, where he had this spontaneous experience of death when he was staying with his uncle at around 16 years old. And he got it from that. He saw in that experience, he met the thing inside of him that would never die. And I'm sure that as that understanding, that moment of insight, of intense seeing, settled in his body-mind and landed, particularly because he was so young, that there would have been difficulty that he also went through as that understanding settled. But I think it's important for the spiritual seeker to realize that pain is her friend. Pain is what is calling you back home. It is that experience of pain within your reality that forces you to question, that forces you to seek in a particular area. Now, of course, there's lots of different responses to pain, and it will depend on the destiny of each individual whether their response focuses them in a so-called spiritual direction. And when I say spiritual direction, I again come back to those 3 questions. It focuses on you the questions of who am I, where did I come from, and where am I going? suddenly, because of the pain, because of the discomfort, because of the dissatisfaction, maybe disappointment that you're beginning to experience in your life, those become the critical questions that you want to answer. So I'm afraid spiritual seeking necessarily has to be accompanied by pain, but just always remember that it is the pain that is driving you forward, that is the motivation and companion on your journey inside yourself. And it will be the pain and the effects of that pain that start your seeking, your inquiry, and the friction of that pain between what you know instinctively is your natural state. That's the fundamental reason of the pain. Somewhere inside all of us, there is a cellular intuitive understanding that our nature, our very nature, is happiness, is peace. That may seem an awfully long way away when you're in pain, but it is the reality of us all. And it's that unconscious call from that knowing that redirects your attention back towards yourself, towards your interiority.
I feel like what I'm about to say makes it all sound so grim, and I'd like to get to the sense of self and release that comes later in a minute. But there's also that sense. I remember I went really deep into it, like particularly like Nisargadatta and that crushing realization that, well, hang on a second, like I can't. There's also nothing I can do to make enlightenment or self-realization happen. And I think it was a couple of years ago when I was speaking to you about it, this sense of like floundering, of like, well, what are we even doing? Like, why? And then that yearning that just keeps pulling and coming up. How I was very fortunate that I've had you, right, to keep me facing in the direction that I knew was the right for me, when I sort of would meander off or have a flop about. For someone that's listening and they go, oh, but if they don't have a reference point, or they don't have someone to say or help them with that, like keep following that yearning, like keep pulling on the thread if it's there, and to not get lost in a sense of, well, if I'm not in charge, then what's the point of doing anything? And get crushed by that feeling? What would you say?
I think the most important thing to remember is ultimately there is no individual doer. So if the spiritual seeking is destined to happen in a particular body-mind, it will. Basically, the whole of this manifestation is fundamentally a process of seeking. Every individual is engaged in their version of seeking, right from the moment when the baby seeks its mother's breast for the first time. The whole of life is about seeking. The quality of the seeking and the focus of the seeking varies immensely through the 7 billion human beings we have at the moment. And those variation, that variety, will be based on each individual's destiny. So if it's your destiny to become involved in spiritual seeking, you will. But there is a transition phase before you have understood from your own experience to your own deepest possible satisfaction that you are not the doer. Before that has taken place, then of course it is going to be that individual doer that is apparently doing the seeking and starting the seeking. And the seeking, that isn't the case fundamentally. The seeking is happening through that individual body-mind. But because of the misperception inside that individual body-mind, where consciousness has become identified with this idea of separation, a separate identity, a separate ego with personal doership, that individual is still under the impression that he or she is the one doing the seeking. But fundamentally, and particularly as you move on this path, it becomes obvious, you begin to see that there was so much you never had control over in this path of seeking that you find yourself on. And as that becomes more and more obvious, there's a parallel understanding of a deeper and deeper experience that you are not the doer, that you are not a separate entity, that you have never been. And so these understandings, the depth of these understandings landing in an individual body-mind, support each other along the way. And the pace of them and the way they happen will be according to each individual's destiny.
Mm. I had a conversation with a student this week, and she put it so beautifully. She said, she just had this spontaneous feeling. She likes her job. And she had this completely spontaneous out of the blue, you should check LinkedIn. And she thought, why would I do that? Right? So then, but she still finds herself checking LinkedIn, even though there's a voice inside going, what are you doing? And then she finds her dream job, what appears to be her dream job. Right? And it's a very unique set of skills that she happens to have. And she's just astounded as to how all this is playing out. And then she starts to dive into the job, and it brings up all these questions for her, right? And she realizes that actually that particular job looks good on paper, but the offering and the interviews and everything, it's not her workplace, not her people, not her culture. And we were chatting, and she said, at first I thought, God, what a waste of time. Obviously that instinct and that intuition was offbeat. But the more time and space she gave it, the more she realized it completely solidified her commitment to where she was at. And she was saying, I can sort of, the more I relax into it, there are no mistakes. And she goes, I'm always so conscious of watching my brain go, oh, you're on track. Oh, you're off track. That has meaning. Oh, that bit doesn't have meaning. And so, and I felt so warmly about this story with her, because I know that for myself. What am I including? What am I excluding? Does this have meaning, and is this doesn't have meaning? And that beautiful relaxation of seeing the connectivity of it all. Obviously, because you're also 30 or so years older than I am. If someone, she was a little younger, and she said, look, I'm still sort of early in my journey, how do I settle into more of that trust, that she said, I can tell the difference between my intellect telling me to do something and this weird, spontaneous feeling. It's like I'm animated by something else. I find myself doing something, watching myself do it. That witness that everyone talks about, or the observer, what are your thoughts on leaning back into the softness of that space without forcing it? But I know we spoke in the last talk about bite-sized pieces, but her and I, she wanted a bit more on that, having that felt experience, and then it dissipating, and then it coming back, and then it dissipating, bridging the gap, essentially.
This manifestation is about experiencing and learning. That's what is going on here. And each individual, according to their destiny, is going to need a particular amount of a particular kind of learning and experiencing before they come to these more essential questions of happiness, of peace, of understanding. And so there is a process within time of a seeking deepening. It's not always the case. Sometimes people will have a very immediate and undeniable experience that completely alters the course of their life. But I think one thing that it reminded me of, your story with this friend of yours, was very often I noticed in my own life that when you start at first to know that this area of spiritual seeking is what you're fundamentally interested in, it's almost like the manifestation, or as the Hindus would say, Maya, illusion, plays a little trick on you, plays a little joke on you. And suddenly, maybe out of the blue, when your orientation is beginning to turn towards the inside and become interested in your interiority and a spiritual search, the manifestation will go, but look, here's your dream job. Surely you're not going to pass that up. It's a funny game that I've noticed in my own life, and I think other people maybe have noticed as well, that when you're on the cusp of something, a cusp that is likely to change radically the direction of your life and where you put your energy, often the siren call of all the beauties and experiencing and opportunities of this manifestation will present you with something just to check. Are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want? And it sounds, by the way you tell the story, that your friend was.
Yes, she was very sure. And fascinated with with this feeling of being animated by something other than. She's like, it wasn't like, I'm so unhappy with my job, I have to go and find a new job. It just suddenly, it was like a bell ringing, she said. It was just like doing in her head. And she was like, just finding herself suddenly on a platform that she doesn't even usually go on, looking at something that seemed destined for her, only to then, and she said it took, I think the important thing is, she said it took a while for her to land in the place where she was like, because it was exciting, actually, no, this isn't for me. And then that clarity that's so clear of, she had the question like, why, what a waste of time and energy, until it landed of like, oh no, this has just got me even more aligned in a better way. Do you think that in order for all of this and the understanding to take place on a deeper level, you have to meditate?
You have to turn towards your interiority. Meditation, for me, meditation, the simplest description of meditation is being with yourself, with whatever is. Now, I presume when you say, do you have to meditate, you're thinking about a more formal practice of meditation.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the answer to that question is no. You don't have to adopt a formal practice of meditation. But meditation and all of the experimentation that's gone on around it across the world in various different cultures over thousands of years shows you that there is some methodology that people before you have found useful. And I think essentially what I would say about meditation is, it is an opportunity for you to be quiet. It is an opportunity, if you make a space in your day which is just dedicated for you, particularly if you're a parent, or you've got a very heavy work schedule, or you're just a normal human being living a busy life in the Western world, it cannot ever be amiss for you to give yourself a time in the day. It doesn't matter to begin with how long it is. What matters is that you stop and you go, I want to stop and be quiet for a period of time and be with whatever is inside of me in that stillness, in that silence. And very often people find that that experience becomes more and more valuable and more essential to keep a balance in their life, where maybe life doesn't give them that much opportunity to be with themselves. Because, as I said, I think previously, all of us come equipped within our body-minds with everything we need for self-realization. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the individual destiny is such that you will be drawn to that that you will begin to explore that you will go through all that you need to go through in that seeking, and that maybe you are a tiny, tiny amount of people who still to this day get to understand what self-realization means. It's still a very rare occurrence, and it has to be that way, because this place is about experiencing and learning. It's about so-called separate individual body-minds with the idea of a personal doership, learning the falsity of that through their own experience. And of course there are different levels of that learning. There are different refinements that go on. Like, just to talk about personal doership briefly, it's very challenging for any individual body-mind who is convinced that he or she is a separate individual with a sense of their own personal doership, to be able to accept that this isn't the case, that this is actually not true. And so there are ways in which people can ascertain that for themselves. And I speak often, I'll briefly repeat it here. One of the ways my last teacher always suggested was, at the end of the day, pick a quiet moment, sit down by yourself in a relaxed way, and choose one action from your day that you're convinced you did. And then just examine how that action came to pass. And if you go back sincerely and carefully through the events that led up to that action, you'll always find that those events weren't in your control. Not only will you find that the initiating events weren't in your control, but everyone knows from their own experience that the outcome of their so-called personal doership, their free will, is never certain. We all know that even if we put all our energy into what we want, it doesn't always happen. When it does happen, we go, you see, there's my personal doership proving its worth and its veracity. But any discerning look at a bigger picture will see that it's hit and miss. So not only did the action that you've examined in your day have a cause over which you had no control, but even when you apparently took that action, the motivation you had was for a particular outcome, and that outcome is never sure. So that is the truth of the place that we live. And that's so challenging, because it hits at the root of identity that started to get created through their love by your parents at the age of 2. That they started to give you a name and refer to you as a separate ego identity, because they wanted you to be safe in a world where some ego identity is necessary. What's not necessary for a mature spiritual seeker is the idea of individual personal doership. There will always be an identification with a separate body-mind and a simple identity, but there won't be that confusion that that identity is exercising personal doership.
Can I share a little story? Because there's some of my friends and we play with the ideas, and I shared that when one of them, like I remember when Mutribo sent me this little exercise, and my experience with it was very enlightening, I'll say the least. Anyway, and they for days they were like, wait, I think I found one thing. No. And then, the next day, at the end of the day, wait, I think, what is that? Maybe that's the... And they said the rigidity in their system, the fury, it even being assigned this task. And then they were like, I'm not doing this anymore, I hate this game, And then And then the return to it, the spontaneous return to it the next day. Anyway, they got to this point where they were like, finally, they thought they'd found this one thing. Like, this is completely independent of all things. This is just, oh. And then they sat there and there was a gap. And then they were like, but I also wouldn't even be doing this unless Jackie and I had the conversation. And they said it was like this slow house of cards falling where they could see us conversing, when we met, all the things we'd done together, and then all the things that had led to that. And it was just this, like a map, basically. And they could see suddenly, like, sort of like, you know, they said when a city lights up, you know, it goes... And I love that description so much when, but also that instinctive rebelliousness of our internal structures of going, no way, like, this is impossible. And have you had that, like, what?
Yeah, I think you briefly referred to, I've told you this story before, but it's a fundamental part of my own journey, so I'll repeat it here. You referred to it. It was with the first meeting I had with my last teacher, Ramesh. So I'd only read his books before I went down to Bombay, and I had scheduled 3 days to be in his little upstairs flat in Bombay, which he opened every day to whoever was out there on the street waiting to come in. And I sat there for the first 2 days and listened to his concept, which was essentially, you are a programmed three-dimensional body-mind object, programmed by your genetic makeup and your conditioning. And your conditioning will get added to as you live your life. And that is what makes up you. And that you has no individual personal doership, no individual free will. So I'd listened for 2 days with these concepts sinking in me and boiling within me. And so on the last, there were 3 question chairs in the room that were the main questions he took. And so I took the one on the end. So I was the last person that day that asked questions. And I remember my first question was something to do with reincarnation, but the second one was the important one. And I looked at him and I said, Ramesh, I think I've understood your concept and everything that you've said, but what I want to ask you is this. What if I cannot find inside me the acceptance of my non-acceptance of your concept? What if I cannot accept my non-acceptance of what you've taught in these last 2 days? And he looked at me with great compassion and he said, then you will have to accept the suffering that goes along with that non-acceptance. And I had this instantaneous cracking in two. I just felt myself split in two. And this uncontrollable sobbing started to rack my body. And when I looked at what was at the base of this tremendous sadness that had suddenly come out, I saw that what had happened when he delivered that answer was I could see two realities had landed inside of me. One was I knew that I'd reached a place from which there was no more falling. I knew from what he said that I'd reached a ground that I would never have to doubt again. I knew that I'd come to some fundamental truth. I knew it. But simultaneous to that, in the other part of me, I had to recognize in understanding that ground and the solidity of it, I had to also recognize simultaneously that that understanding might never stabilize in me. And it was that understanding that had been driving my life for years. And it was the mixture of this immense relaxation from knowing I'd got to a place from which there was no more falling, while simultaneously seeing that I had no guarantee that I would ever really fully understand that split me in two. So it's painful. It's painful to take these things in, but what the benefit of it is in the long term is that you are clearing out the old. It's like a purge. It's like basically going back inside yourself and freeing yourself of the burden of the concepts that you've been carrying up to that moment, from your conditioning, from how you've been taught to think by all of the influences that you've had in your life. It finally renders you back here now to the present in all your simplicity and all your beauty. And until that has stabilized inside of you, it can be a searing vision of anguish and poignancy and despair.
Yeah. For me personally, I'm going to mention a couple of things here. So no amount of surfing, Taoist Zen tea ceremonies, therapy has ever been able to clear that out like meditating. It seems to provide a deep clean, unlike anything else, where it's not so much an intellectual understanding, because it happens the clearing out seems to happen quite quickly, in that it's sort of like flashy, like it comes up, you're like, oh my gosh, that memory and that experience and so forth. And then you don't feel the burden of that anymore. It's such a different process for me than anything else. And I just want to circle back in, because I remember something you said on the retreat that we did last in December. And you said, you know, one of the guests said, oh, you know, I actually don't like meditating. And you said, that's fine. You don't have to meditate, but you have to find something, you know, almost on a daily basis that you can do. And I just, it's probably, I've heard this inside my own head before. And so like, oh, sweet, there's an out here, you know, like there's an off-ramp. And what you said, I think, was really important. And I want you to dive into a little bit, which was, but it can't be something that you already do. And if you already do it, you have to approach it in an entirely new way, i.e., and so a lot of people say, surfing's my meditation, running's my meditation, this is my meditation. And I think there's a big difference between there being a meditative activity and something of sitting with self. Can you, I don't know how to then put colour to that.
Yeah, I think one example would be to compare the experience of, say, the athlete, the professional athlete who speaks about being in the zone, and a meditator. And so, and there are other areas of life where you find yourself in the present. It could be that your work is so involving that basically you are so wrapped up in using what I call the working mind, the mind that is in the present moment, to solve whatever issue is in front of you, that time stops, that you can be in your office or in your home focused on a project, and before you know it, 4 or 5 hours have gone by. That is what it feels like to be in the present. For an athlete too, when he's playing badly, a set can seem like eternity. But if he's playing well, it can be gone in the blink of an eye. So I think the difference for a meditator, and the difference essentially lies in the focus of a meditator, is the athlete won't necessarily translate that experience into a wider and deeper context around his whole life. He may deeply enjoy the experience of being in the zone within his chosen sport, but he won't necessarily realize that that is a doorway into a deeper understanding of life. I remember something that Osho used to say. He suggested that spiritual seeking would have probably started from the first human being's experience of sexual ecstasy or union. That it was almost certainly the case that the first time that sense of merging and disappearance of, as it were, being in the zone sexually, where time stops, where you're one with your partner, it would have been those spontaneous experiences that some alert individual would have gone, hang on a second, I really like that space. Do I need my partner for that, or does it exist in another dimension? So that's the start of when an experience that can happen in life starts to move into a deeper and wider and broader focus about the very substance of life itself. So I think meditation orientates you towards that deeper looking, whereas the spontaneous and beautiful experiences that happen in all sorts of different ways in people's lives as they live their lives don't necessarily ring that bell. Although, again, with a particular destiny, it could. Some athlete could actually find in that space that he or she is suddenly being led into a deeper inquiry inside themselves as to the source of what they've experienced.
I can feel my hesitation in going here, but I'm just going to do it. So I can feel my body bristling around, and I don't know Osho's teaching as well, absolutely nothing like you, but around even just hearing the words Osho and sexuality in the same sentence because of what I do know. And I do sometimes tend to get caught here. So consciousness is expressing itself through a mind-body organism that happens to be a teacher. And the teacher does things that are, again, my judgment, my perception, out of alignment. Is it okay for this mind-body organism, being mine, to be, like, is that my cosmic map going, okay, that's not my story. But then Alan Watts, in his backstory, doesn't rile me up at all. I'm like, that's not my circus, not my monkeys. And love listening to Alan Watts. But then that over here, less so. How do we navigate this with people that speak such intense wisdom and have such knowing and truth, yet there's facets of them that we go, and rile up against, whilst and I'm trying to own this, because there's also other teachers that it doesn't seem to bother me. What's going on there? How do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? Is what they say still necessarily, is it still true? And then their day-to-day behaviour maybe less aligned? Can we go into that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So the first thing to remember is anything you experience is yours. So it's nothing to do with the teacher at all. It's to do with whatever the outside triggers inside of you. You are your world. Your world only exists when you are awake. When you're in deep sleep, you and your world disappear. So I think it's important never to forget that if you want to come to the understanding, you have to take it back inside yourself and see what it is that is being triggered there. See what it is inside of you. You can rail against the outside world, but it won't actually help you. In fact, it could divert your energy by making you feel more righteous or more right or more morally good or whatever it is. And the second thing to say is we find ourselves in a manifestation that is made of interconnected opposites. You cannot have love without hate. You cannot have light without darkness. That is the way this place works, and it is the very contrast of all those different opposites that allow us to perceive. We would not be able to perceive black without white, and vice versa. So that's the game here. That's the way we see. So as to why one teacher's behavior triggers you, as opposed to another. Only you and maybe your therapist would be able to go back inside of you and trace what it is that is being stimulated, is being triggered inside of you. Now, let me be very clear. That in no way is a justification for a particular behavior that you find obnoxious or repellent. This is not an excuse for someone to misrepresent a particular concept so that it can cover up behavior that they probably know is wrong. That is something they will have to deal with the consequences for. But your business is your business. So as a seeker, as a spiritual seeker, as a person who's interested in their own happiness, this is something that is in the way. This reactivity is not wrong or inappropriate. It's perfectly natural and normal for your body-mind to respond and react to that input that's coming from this set of circumstance that you describe. You have done nothing wrong in that. That is a natural reaction that you've had. But you then take it as an alert, aware spiritual seeker. You take that information and you go, hang on a second, why is this coming up in me? What is it inside of me that my own inner guide, my own, what the Indians call the Satguru, what is it that is being pointed to here? What is it that I haven't understood that this reactivity is there? Because it's important to recognize two different qualities of. Osho used to separate these two qualities as calling one response and the other reaction. So a response implies awareness. A response is something that you are aware of. A reaction is something that is being done to you by something you haven't understood from your past. So the first thing for a spiritual seeker is to understand what is behind any unconscious reactivity in their relations with the outside world, for their own benefit, not to make that behavior right, as I said before, just for their own benefit. They want to understand themselves, so it behooves them, it is in their interest to go back in and understand how this triggering took place. Once they've understood it, then what they're left with, when they're faced with any situation in the outside world, is response. And that response will always be now. It will always be in the present moment, and it will be dictated by the particular makeup of this particular individual body-mind and the context and circumstance that it is presented with. And just because you respond to a particular set of circumstance on a particular day in one way, it in no way means that when faced with a very similar set of circumstance on another day, your response will necessarily be the same. Enlightenment is not about consistency. It's about presence. It's about being available. We spoke before about right action. The best translation of right action for me, which is a Buddhist concept, and it gets caught up in all sorts of morality and right or wrong. But for me, the simplest way to define right action is a response in the moment to whatever is. Reaction in the moment to whatever is necessarily implies a going back into some past that you haven't understood. Response is you staying present and completely available to whatever the circumstances inside of you. And that availability will help whatever the situation is in front of you to resolve as quickly and easily and wisely as possible. Your presence and lack of reactivity will then not stimulate reactivity in the other person, but stimulate their presence. And so that you start to suddenly find yourself involved in a virtuous circle as opposed to a vicious one.
Yeah, and I think it's the inconsistency for me. Like, I'm aware, there's enough awareness to know that there's an inconsistency in this about where it gets sticky for me and where it doesn't. And as you were talking, I was like, I can feel the tentativeness is around exactly as you said, that, well, if there's like a landing inside and a full acceptance that then no action will be taken, I can feel a facet of myself being like, but what about, where will there be accountability? And what if something does really upset me in a moment in time? Does that mean that, you know, if I see a teacher doing something, I'm using teacher as an example because I am one, but and I've had so many, but, you know, if there's a person, I should say, doing something that you just say, whoa, hang on a second, I'm not okay with that. What I'm hearing myself in this process is projecting into all the variabilities and all the, you know, make sure you have a set of rules, you know, like thou shalt not kind of thing, and the settling back into the trust that if a situation like that comes up, I'll deal with it in the ways I know how to deal with it because there's integrity there and there's love there. Actually, the hypothesizing the reactivity takes us out of that space. It takes us out of. I remember you saying, it doesn't mean that anger won't arise. It doesn't mean that, like a startling response might come out of someone in a moment in time once the understanding's landed. And I realized also at that moment that I still had this kind of like happy cloud mung bean, you know, that person will never react and they'll always be, you know, so understanding and graceful. And that's so far from the actual truth. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and you can see what's behind all of this hypothesizing is identity. Mm-hmm. It's the separate doer again, you know, it's still this clinging to, I have to do something.
Yeah.
And it's completely understandable because to let go into the moment does require trust and courage. Mm-hmm. It requires also practice. And so even before the understanding lands fully, it's possible to playfully experiment with allowing yourself more leeway in your responses and more understanding and awareness around when you're triggered, so that you're aware there's something from your past that is coming up that may not be at all appropriate or relevant to the situation that's bringing it up. So I think every time you find yourself beset by fear, because actually what you were describing is, what if I just let go, what's to stop Putin ruling the world and you know, every sex maniac hurting everyone, and you know, it's essentially what's behind it is, if I let go, will the ethical fiber of this manifestation suddenly collapse? And the answer to that is, well, you'll never know until you try. And the likely probability, I can say from personal experience, is far from the ethical backbone of good, of the things, of the highest aspirations of being human, far from that collapsing. By remaining in the present, in responsiveness rather than reactivity, you will be contributing to the elevation of our whole species by being another energy that is not being taken away from now, but remaining in now and responding in whatever way is appropriate for your individual body-mind to that context. And that presence is the healing of everything.
I remember when we were on the retreat and one of the girls got really like, well, what about activism? You know, like, what if I'm meant to be an activist, and then if I just let go, like, how will I do anything? And I remember, and you said it very tenderly, it's like, if that's your destiny, if, you know, clean water or, you know, whatever you're finding is your purpose and you're in alignment with that, it'll happen actually even more smoothly, with more flow and more efficacy. And her and I still actually talk about that. And she just said that's soft, and now it's redirected the way in which she moves, and she goes off feeling. Not, well, I guess I've got to map this out and I've got to have all these projects and all these plans, and this is, she just sees what comes, and she's like, that feels good. That's what I need. I'll go with that. And she said she's got so much more energy now. And I think that's really, I know that there's that is exactly as you described, that sense of like, well, if I'm not doing it, who's doing it? You know? And the irony being that the exhaustion that comes with that as well, the force, the push of pushing a square peg through a round hole because there's an intellectual idea that this needs to get done as opposed to a felt experience. Thank you. I'm glad we went over that ground.
Yeah, and just to finish on that point, I think the issue around any kind of activism, regardless of the area that it happens, is it's very important for anyone involved in that to go through the same process I suggested with you when you react to, the sexual abuse of a teacher, is that you look inside and you see what is at the basis of your activism. Is it really because you want to save the planet? Or is it something inside yourself that you projected out onto saving the planet that you want to save inside yourself? Now, neither of those scenarios are wrong, but in terms of effectiveness, if you are actually trying to solve a personal problem through your activism, it may work up to a certain point. It may bring a certain relief, a certain satisfaction, a certain respect, a certain worthiness and a certain position within society, but it will never solve the issue. That issue can only be solved by you inside of you. And if you do that, then, again, as I said in the retreat, then it might be that you go back into activism clean and clear and so much more effective. Or you may realize that it was actually hiding something that you could only fix inside of yourself. And any blame and judgment that you projected towards the outside world around this cause or activism that you'd embraced was in fact hiding an issue that you had to sort out with yourself.
We've been studying it in my psychology course around how there's like and this is through the psychological lens, but I want you to tip in with the consciousness lens, that there's like an energy and a force that comes in and someone moves into, say, activism was the example we're exploring as well. And then all the fight parts kind of come up, the fight response. And that at that moment, they tend to lose the purpose because the fight and the judgment becomes, well, I'm fighting the good fight. Why aren't you fighting the good fight? And look at all the other people who aren't fighting the good fight. And then they're so off-piste. And it can be a very painful journey to come back. I know we were sharing that story around the American woman who, kind of went public and said, listen, my activism is exhausting me. And then she got massively attacked where everyone was like, if you're not doing it, who's doing it? There's like hysteria around. And she really has honoured that, like, this is just not in alignment for me in this moment. And I have to pare back and I have to be gentle. And can you talk to, when the energy comes through, it feels clean and clear. And then when we catch ourselves and we're like, hang on a second, this is morphing into something else. The process of coming back, through that painfulness as well. I know it takes an enormous amount of awareness.
Yeah, it's just that. I mean, that's for me the benefit of a practice, of a meditative practice, because in a meditative practice, essentially what you're doing through closing your eyes and going inside is you're creating space. You're by watching whatever is happening in the moment during the time that you sit in silence, you are creating space between the watcher and whatever is being watched, is whatever is being seen. So that convinces you energetically, cellularly, that you cannot be what it is you're seeing. So, I mean, for me, this is something that I think would be such an incredible thing to bring into human beings' lives right from an early age. As the simple truth is, whatever you can see cannot be you, because there is always something that is seeing it. So whatever you can see cannot be you. And if you look at yourself in a mirror, you're not seeing you, you're seeing a reflection of you. So that sets you on the right inquiry to go, okay, so I am that which is seeing. Everything else is outside of me. So in a regular practice in meditation, that understanding, that space can be created, and that's what I see as being essentially beneficial about it. It starts to settle you. It starts to put distance inside of you between whatever the circumstances are in your life and that which sees those circumstances. And that process automatically produces more calm, more space, more love.
Mm. Why do you think that the love piece is so often missed in spiritual teachings, and they get caught up in the thou shalt not, like the rules, reading the sutras, doing the, it's like doing the things as opposed to coming into the heart? I've seen it a lot in a lot of lineages I've been in.
I think that's the key thing. Religions tend to make that mistake. Because religion, what is a religion, basically? A religion is something that a bunch of people, after an enlightened person actually was in the body, probably not immediately after, but sometimes immediately after, wrote down about whatever it was they remembered that that person who actually had the understanding had shared while he or she was in the body. So already we're in a Chinese whisper situation. So, Buddha says whatever Buddha says, and to their credit, I think the joke was like within 24 hours of Buddha's death, 30 different sects had already formed, which shows you the way people remember things, different things are going to be important to different people. But once you start that codification of a teaching, and the actual source of that wisdom is no longer present in the body, then of course, as years go by, so the further you go away from that original insight and understanding, and the more you need to produce rules and regulations in order to control people. So for me, it's the word religion that suffers from that. For me, mysticism or spirituality doesn't, but that nearly always requires a living body-mind that has understood, that has settled inside him or herself, and is prepared to share that and speak about it with other people who are on the way. And that's really when that amazing osmosis can happen, when that transference can happen, that transformation happens magically between the source of that understanding, when that understanding is heard and a resonance is created in the other person. And for that moment, there is a deep communication between consciousness and consciousness.
Resonance is one of my favorite words. It's so, the feeling of it, but it's so hard to put words to. It's like when the resonance is there, it's so all-empowering and so like tangible. But to describe it, it's kind of like trying to describe, I always use the example of like eating a peach to someone that's never even eaten a piece of fruit. It's such a beautiful, experience. Can I ask you, is there anything that, in my questioning, is there anything that you're like, I would have actually liked to have introduced this, or what else would be important? Is there anything else?
No, I don't. I'm really just. I've been in response mode with you. So whatever you've come with, I've tried to basically. I think what I could usefully repeat is just for anyone to remember, you and anyone else who may listen to this, is that everything that's been said are simply conceptual pointers. They're signposts. They're signposts that, in my experience, helped me to direct my attention back inside myself towards where I came from. And so use them in your life if you feel to. If you feel a resonance with anything that you've heard, then inquire, find out about it for yourself. This is not about someone telling you the truth. It's about someone using words and concepts to try and give a sense of what that truth has meant inside of this particular body-mind. And that will always be an imperfect process. That's the way it has to be. Truth can never be expressed with words, because words, language is based in duality, and truth is one, or as Advaita says, not two. So whatever you feel attracted to, whatever makes sense for you, whatever brings that feeling of peace and love inside your heart, inside your body-mind, that's an indicator of something that is calling to you, that is worth putting some attention on if it's your destiny. And that's all I can recommend, is that people always come back to themselves and see what's going on inside of them. Like, for instance, with the non-doership, it's a very challenging idea, and I hope we go into it over time, because it has many layers. But if someone, and it's completely natural, as I've told you the story with Ramesh, if I can't accept my non-acceptance of your concept, I didn't accept it when I first heard it. I found it horrible. Everything inside me rebelled. So I know how challenging it is, but I also know the freedom that lies on the other side of it, the peace, the love, the openness, the connectivity that it opens up inside of you, the belongingness, the sense of not being separate, of never having been separate. So I know the treasures that are on the other side of this somewhat brutal doorway. So go at your own pace. Just do whatever feels natural and right for you, and see what you find.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jack. And we'll just finish as we always do, in silence, because truth is very quiet, and the easiest access point to it is to just be with yourself, with whatever is inside of you, whatever is around you, and watch.